Hi everyone, I think I've got that set up okay. I've actually gone back to this, so following on from the sheep painting developments yesterday, gone back to this street scene from Cardiff, and I've actually put the paper down flat on a table now, and looking at my reference, I actually crouched it down to take the reference photo, and I've realised that with this kind of free-flowing and very loose approach, one of the beautiful things about it, or one of the things I love, is the unexpected effects that you can get from it. However, you can fall, or I can fall into little mistakes here and there. So for example, the main one here is this building, the bottom of this building should come down to around about the waist of this guy. Okay, so it's a much taller building than I've got. So I've gone back to my burnt umber watercolour marker, so I'll just loosely put the vertical edge of that building in, and then I'm going to put a few people back here as well. And I think what I'm going to do, I've used blue here on top of the burnt umber, and I'm going to switch to using a ballpoint pen to add in some people and a few fine line details of the architecture of this building, because it was this building at the end that kind of caught my eye and made me want to paint the scene. And even though you know, it's not an exact representation, I'd like to capture some of it. So if I look at my reference, the feet of the people come to about here on this guy, and they're up to about here, so that sort of size. So I'm just going to very loosely block in some people here. So they're off in the distance. This line here could perhaps do with being a... No, actually, that's not too bad, actually. That's not too bad. But something isn't quite right still. Yeah, I've made them look a bit... They almost look too small, even though that is the case on the reference. I need to have a think about that, so we'll come back to that in a moment. But what I want to do is just add in a few little architectural details without going too wild. So there's a kind of an unusually arch-shaped window there. The clock, which, if you remember previously, I just put that in as a block of tone. We'll put that in as a circle, as one might expect. And then a few little architectural details for this tower. And that's probably enough. Looking again now at the people, it's not too bad, but I think I've sort of made them... What is the problem here? I think it's these awnings. They don't look quite right. I can't quite work out how to fix it. So we'll ponder that for the moment. And I'm going to come back in and just tidy up some of the bits I've got here. So I'm switching to a magenta watercolour marker. And I'm just going to tidy up, or add a bit of colour to that lady's bag, or the strap rather. And then I'm going to switch to my Prussian blue watercolour marker, and I'm going to use that to put in some rather bolder outlines on these people in the foreground. So I just want to kind of bring them well, into the fore a little bit more than they are. But I'm going to try and stay fairly light and lively with my mark making, because I like the looseness, but I want to bring these two more into the foreground compared to the people that they are apparently following. So in some cases I can just go over the lines that I've already got there without being too fussy about it. I think that's working reasonably well. Now I do want to add a little bit of a foot down here. But this lady, I think I'm going to leave without any feet. I think that works okay, so I'm going to leave that as is. And then I'm going to come back in with my burnt umber to fill in the sole of that shoe. And we'll use a bit of that to put in a bit of a darker shadow there. And then I mentioned before, let me just grab my coloured pencils. So I mentioned before that the bits of cauliflowering that we've got here, I could turn those into a bit of a pattern on the shirt. So we'll go with that idea. Not sure how well that's working. So we'll ponder that for a moment. And I'm just going to grab some white paint. So I've got this nice brush here which comes to a point. This is a fake squirrel, but any sort of liner brush would do. And this is my interactive tinting white, and I'm just going to grab a bit of that out of the tube. And as I mentioned in a previous stream, this pub's called the Bell. So I'm just going to very gently, without making anything too bold, hint at the lettering there. And that's all I want to do for the lettering. It's just a little hint so that, you know, if you happen to know the location, then you might sort of think, oh, I think I know where that is because there's the bell. But it's very much just a general interpretation of the scene. So I'm now thinking I could perhaps use a little bit more of that white on these people in the foreground. But again, not too much. So we'll actually put a bit of a highlight there. Now that I look again, I don't actually mind the patterning that I've included there on the shirt. Now, in terms of the people in the middle distance, just give this lady a sort of a double strap on the bag, or guy, whatever it is. just anchor them a bit more with a couple of shadows. So then really the question is just how to address this area. So I think what I will do is cheat a little bit and make these people a bit bigger, and I'll come in and do that with the watercolour marker and then come back in with the biro in just a second, and I think that'll work rather better than the size of the distant people I had before. Yeah, I think that's a bit more convincing in terms of the perspective and scale now, so that works okay. I am going to come back in with my biro just to make things in keeping. So I'm going for very much a sketchy look here off in the distance, so things are more or less somewhat indistinguishable, but overall hopefully the suggestion is of people walking along. They could perhaps do with being a bit paler than I've created them, but on the whole I think it works okay. So next then, just picked up watercolour marker. This is lamp black. Now I don't normally use black, but I still feel the need to kind of bring these two forward, and I'm just pondering whether to add a touch of black instead of this this blue that I put down, or perhaps keep it. Actually, that's working quite nicely. So the black line hasn't completely covered the blue line that I just put down, so I quite like that effect actually. So we'll keep going with that. I'm going to go back to my burnt umber. So yes, I think that's worked reasonably well. That sort of brought these ladies forward in the scene a bit more than they were, but still maintained that loose look. So I kind of getting much more of a sense of people receding off into the distance there. So I'm fairly happy with that. This guy is still just about here, and I like the fact that he's barely defined. I like the bell bit. So that, for me, that's working quite well. I want to just add a few gentle lines to this barrier without making it too much of a feature. So I'm just going to, it's not a geometrically accurate rendering of the thing, but just a little bit of just wanted to solidify it a bit. And then we'll come in here with these awnings, just put a bit of shadow on those vertical poles, and put a bit of what I call visual confusion in here, just to suggest other structures and things going on, but without being too specific. And then I think the only thing I want to do now is maybe just make these people a little bit paler. So just going to grab my watercolour. Going to add a drop of water so I've just added a drop of water to what paint I've got left on the lid. So I'm just going to mix that bit of white acrylic that I still had on my brush in with the stuff that's on the lid. We'll just sort of mix up a neutral pale brown, greenish, reddish brown, whatever we get. And I just want to sort of solidify these people and remove the sort of white bits showing through in the middle of the silhouettes. And in doing that, it's also just making them slightly paler, so they're a little bit more off in the distance. And I think that's worked reasonably well. Then maybe I can use some of that over here as well. Then I think what I will do is go back to my Prussian blue, just put a little darker line there. Back in with the ballpoint pen, just going to put a few marks around the edges of that white paint that I put in. And I think that's, so there are still some cauliflowers here, but I don't mind those. So it's definitely not a perfect depiction of the scene in Cardiff, but for me it's captured the feel of what I experienced on that day, the kind of gentle hustle and bustle of the city. I really feel like these people are walking away from me now. As mentioned before, I really like that sort of hidden guy. I was tempted to put a sort of a necktie and collar on him there, but I'm happy with it as is. And then I've still got what I call my hidden guy here in the left-hand corner. What we could do with is a bit of white paint to cover up that little brown line there, and perhaps there. So that makes it a bit better. But if you remember, the idea of that guy is that he's sort of hidden and barely rendered. So I'm hoping people will look at this and then notice him later. And then I think all I need to do now is just sign it. So I'm going to do that in the bottom right hand corner with watercolour marker. And then I'm going to hide the date over here. Not hide it, but just put it off to the side. So 2024. And I think that one's pretty much done. So I'm going to leave it as is. The biro I feel worked nicely. It's a little bit of detail off in the distance, but it's not enough to pull that building forward. So on the whole, I think I've created a nice sense of atmosphere there. And then I'm going to let this completely dry. Then I'll photograph it and then pop it up on my website. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back soon with another